Welcome back to another episode of the Pit Lane Yappers. I'm Mox.
And I'm Rosie, and this is Austria again.
Yay! Um, Before we get into FP1, Alex Dunn was in for Lando Norris, and Dino was in for Charles. I have for Lewis, but I'm pretty sure it was for Charles.
Yes, for Charles, and GP wasn't Max's race engineer this weekend.
Also, we're recording this on July 1st, so happy birthday, Danny Rick. I have your jersey. Happy birthday, Danny Rick. Hope you're enjoying Wimbledon. But now we can get into FP1. I had that basically everyone was going off and struggling. But Lance went P2 and Alonso went P4.
One of my notes is dyno in 16 car. Dyno no floor.
Also, Ferrari was slow, which we were expecting from Dino because he hadn't driven the car yet. Like, that wasn't something like, oh, he's slow, get him out of the car. It was just he didn't have experience in the car. This was his first time in the car, of course it was. But
Also,
Lewis was
Ferrari's
also struggling. And you were telling me he had a gearbox issue, but they didn't tell that on the radio or like on the stream. So I was like, wow, Lewis is really bad today.
Yeah, basically that. Yeah.
Don't worry, it was just for that day though, because Lewis like locked in the next few days. But also, you know who was kind of cooking?
Who?
Bortoletto.
Oh yeah. He was.
Which, like, everyone's like, you gotta give credit to Nico Hulkenberg, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm expecting Nico Hulkenberg to put the Sauber in places it shouldn't be because he did it with the Haas last year. But
And also,
Bortoletto, it's his first season in F1 in a Sauber.
Yeah, and well, just enough said really, like, what are you doing?
Also, Gasly was P3 for the longest time in FP1.
I thought that. I did think, oh well.
I was like, ding ding ding, illegal car.
But Alex Dunn.
Yeah, cooking.
Yeah. First
Cooking.
Irishman in a F1 car in 20 years.
And he represented that country with pride.
And was like 4/10 off Oscar in the car.
Yeah.
And
also, McLaren had brought specific upgrades to just Lando's car because Lando wanted this brake package, and Oscar was like, yeah, no, I don't want my brakes like that, but Lando did, so it was only on Lando's car. And so Alex Dunn was literally cooking in a car that was literally made for Lando Norris, which tells you just how good of a driver Alex Dunn is.
And the thing as well with this is it does emphasize the importance of the engineering of the car.
Yeah.
Because all the other, like, Dino was not, he wasn't near Lewis and he wasn't up in the top 5 either.
Yeah.
But
this also says it is the car.
Yeah, I'm not discrediting.
It's not just the car,
but
it's not just the car, but the car does help.
Yeah.
But there was a yellow flag, and Alonso spun, and his radio was hilarious. He was like, "Wow, that was the worst outlap I've ever done in my career. Thank God it was an FP1." And I was like, "Yep, great. That's how this weekend's gonna go." But it was better, everybody. And also, talking about Gasly cooking, do you know who wasn't cooking? His teammate, Franco Colapinto. P19.
He is on my op list.
Also, this was the race. This was supposed to be Colapinto's last race. But Alpine announced that they are sticking with Franco, and they're going to decide on a race-by-race basis, which I feel like really explains that they do not support their drivers at all.
No, it's just peculiar.
Yeah.
To be honest.
there was actually another yellow flag, and Ocon was off. Fully off. But he didn't hit the wall. Nobody hit the wall, actually. So, like, everybody was like, that's really impressive that nobody hit the wall. But that was also, like, right when they got the green flag again. That's when Dunn matched Oscar exactly. Time for time, matched him. Which the commentators were like, this should not be happening with an F2 driver whose first ever free practice. Like, he should not be matching Oscar. Like, this tells you just how good of a driver Dunn is. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, they gave a fun fact right before they announced the top three, and it kind of hurt me, but Alonso has never been on a podium in Spielberg. Ever.
Just not his track, then.
He hates this track. And he will tell you he hates this track.
But
P1 went George, Max, and then Oscar, and then Alex Dunn was P4.
But this track gels for some people. I think George, Lando, Max are certainly ones who
Max loves this track because it's his home.
Bortoletto apparently loves this track.
He likes the high speeds and the elevation change, is what he was saying on F1 TV.
But
FP2,
Focus.
Lawson went out like basically first or second on track, and he immediately came in and said his steering wheel is only forcing him right, like he barely can turn it left. And if you watched the onboard, like, it truly, like, he would, if he let go of the steering wheel, which I don't know why he would, but he did sometimes, and it, literally the steering wheel went, which means something's wrong with his car.
Yeah.
DC, I think, said it might have been an axle or a gearbox issue, but they never fixed his car.
Sounds like that.
But they never fixed his car, so I don't really understand what it could have been where they didn't have to, like, break apart his car. But Lance Stroll also went P2 in this session. Don't mention that. It was only him and Lawson on track, okay? Shh. But this was also the free practice where everyone was saying George Russell was going to Aston Martin. Did we forget the Aston Martin boys are locked in until 2027, and you will have to pry them, their dead cold hands, off of the steering wheel from an Adrian Newey car?
I don't understand where everyone got this rumour from, because as far as I am concerned, Mercedes have been soft launching George's contract for a bit now.
I think, though, that if Max really does leave Red Bull, Toto would take Max over George because he loves Max.
That's a silly thing to do.
But I think it's ridiculous to do, but I think he would do it. Do you know what I mean?
And then what? Where does that leave George?
Red Bull. Cadillac?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking.
I'm wondering if Cadillac's waiting to see if any drivers... Like, if Max leaves, I'm wondering if Cadillac is going to try to get him.
Well...
Like, is that why Cadillac's not announcing anything?
Talking to Perez and Tsunoda.
Yeah. And
Bottas.
Shoot. Bottas and Joe and somebody else that... Who was it? Oh, Drugovich.
Not Sargent, no.
Nope. But this is when Lewis started impeding Antonelli. He did get marked for it. And this was also the free practice that Alex Brundle was saying Aston Martin looks the best they've ever looked since their first season. I was like, I used to pray for times like this. But nothing really else happened, but P1 was Lando, P2 was Oscar, P3 was Max, P4 was Lance, P8 was Bortoletto, who was cooking.
Yeah, he's fine.
And P9 was Alonso. Bortoletto, was like, oh, I see people saying I shouldn't have a seat next year. Let me start cooking.
Um,
Um,
yeah, I just have my other note is that Charles is in the gravel at turn 6.
I wasn't gonna mention that for you, but okay, yeah. But
Um,
FP3, I have literally no notes.
oh, I have that Max wasn't happy with his Red Bull. He was saying that it was snappy. And then I also noted that Max was talking to Simon a a lot nicer than the way he
Yeah.
talked to GP. Like,
Well, if you listen, like when I watch old races, Mark Webber is a bit harsh, but like I mean his teammate was Sebastian Vettel. I too would be at my wit's end. But Daniel Ricciardo, like he would complain and then he'd come onto the radio after they fix it and he goes, "Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that." Like I think GP and Max have a dynamic where Max can snap and GP knows like, "Oh, it's just,
yeah,
it's just Max being Max." But like for a radio engineer that's not used to
his.
Max, probably like is very much like, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? He's yelling at me. And it's like Max isn't blaming him, it's just Max is frustrated. So yeah, he was a bit nicer to Simon. But for FP3, the only note I have is Sauber was struggling with their pit stops. They could not get the wheel nuts to tighten for the longest time. Like it took them like 30 seconds, which is very fast, faster than I could have done it, but long for F1. I also have McLaren seems comfortable when the commentators were saying this isn't a track for McLaren. And then Lando went P1 and Oscar went P2 and I went, what? This track isn't for
McLaren as well, but
yeah. And P3 was Max, which was the first time since like the first time he seemed uncomfortable with his car, like really uncomfortable. Like he got P3, but in his post like interview, he was like, "Yeah, I should not have gotten P3."
But also the results for FP2 and FP3 were exactly the same.
Exactly the same. But that goes on to quali. So Q1, I don't have much other than Russell was really struggling. I don't know why. Nobody knows why, because Kimi wasn't. But George did not seem comfortable in that car until his last flying lap. And I also have Carlos is out of Q1 3 times in a row now.
Yeah, I also have that.
But like I also feel like people being the commentators, they're like, wow, Carlos is out for 3 times in a row. That's shocking from him. But they have to remember he's not in a Ferrari anymore.
Yeah.
He's in a Williams who does not have Ferrari's budget. So they are trying to figure it out. And like, obviously they're building the car for Alex Albon. And if they have very different driving styles, Carlos has to learn that car before he can actually get a good result out of it. But I will say 3 times in a row, people are like, oh my gosh, Carlos is washed. And I'm like, all right, wait a minute. That's like saying Lewis Hamilton is washed because he's struggling in Ferrari.
Well, people do say that.
Yeah, but like I don't understand why. But the drivers that were out were Nico Hülkenberg, Carlos Sainz, Yuki Tsunoda, Esteban Ocon, and Lance Stroll. Which we have to note, Hülkenberg was dead last. That's important for Q3, everybody. Just letting everybody just put that in the back of your mind. Hülkenberg was dead last. But like between Q1 and Q2, Carlos came onto the radio and he's like, this is an absolute undrivable car. There is damage. I cannot drive this car. And apparently they did have damage, but for the longest time, Williams didn't say anything. So I think it was DC who was like, maybe Carlos is upset that Alex outqualified him again. Like, and I was like, or maybe he actually does have damage and Williams just can't see it right now. I would trust the driver over the pit like wall.
Well, I don't know. And Q2.
But Q2, both Racing Bulls were in when one Red Bull was out, by the way.
Q2 was pretty boring until the grass was on fire.
Yeah. Lewis went over a little bit too much of a curb and he sparked and the grass caught on fire.
And
I thought we would have learned from the 3 red flags of the grass on fire from what was it, Japan or China? But I guess not. And that left like one flying lap to go for Q2. And Gabriel Bortoleto went, okay, let me lock in.
Yeah,
he flew. I was like, all right, who grabbed the McLaren and painted it highlighter green? But the drivers that were out were Ollie Behrman, Franco Colapinto, Isaac Hadjar, Alex Albon, and Fernando Alonso, which we have to note that Isaac Hadjar was out-qualified by Liam Lawson. Liam Lawson also had a pretty good weekend before he terrorized Fernando Alonso for a little bit, but we'll get there. But that moves us into Q3, which I have no notes other than Liam Lawson out-qualified Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri got screwed over by the yellow.
I have one note.
But Oscar Piastri was on a flying lap, and I think it was Ocon who caused the yellow, or Pierre caused the yellow. I can't remember who it was.
I think it was Colapinto.
Colapinto was out. So it had to be Gasly, if it was an Alpine.
Yeah, it was.
So Gasly spun, and Oscar had to obviously ease up because he was in a yellow sector, and Lando had passed it. So Lando and him were on a flying lap, and obviously Lando was faster. So Lando got pole position. P2 was Charles Leclerc, and P3 was Oscar Piastri. I will say, though, Oscar fans on the internet were like, it doesn't count. Like, the gap doesn't count because he got a yellow flag. And I was like, wait a minute. Yes, it does. It's just unfortunate that the gap is so big, but it does count still. It's not like a red flag where it's like, we gotta restart. It doesn't count. Like,
yeah. Unfortunately.
The race, everyone was almost all starting on mediums, except I think 3 people were starting on softs. Which they were saying is a weird strategy to start on mediums, and then okay. Well, we'll get there. But they were saying it's weird that almost everyone's starting on mediums, and then Bernie Collins came on and was like, no, it's not. That's like the strategy you want to start on, is starting on mediums. And I was like, ooh. But then we get to the formation lap, where everybody takes off, except one.
Sainz is stuck.
Sainz, for some reason, said he was stuck in first gear, and it wasn't moving. Not for some reason. I mean, he said it. It's true. So they aborted the start, and as soon as they were like, okay, aborted start, the marshals pushed him. They were like, yeah, go ahead. You can push him to the pit lane or whatever. And he got started again. He's like, okay, I can race. He pulls into the pit lane, because they all have to pull into the pit lane if it's an aborted start to start again. And his brakes caught on fire. Like, this is not a little teeny tiny fire. Like, they needed to fire extinguisher it out.
He was still in there. He was still in there right up.
He was just sitting.
Pushed him into the garage.
I was like, girl, I would be halfway to Silverstone if my car was on fire.
They had to radio him to get out. And I was like...
Yeah. I was like, sir, you're definitely not starting this race. So Carlos had a DNS. So that meant Alex Albon was the only Williams driving. But while we were waiting for the race start, Alonso came onto the radio. Aston Martin took let's get cooking a little too literally. Alonso came onto the radio and he's like, I can't even tell you the temperature of my seat. It's like 200 degrees. It's hot. I think they said this is one of the hottest Spielberg races they've had. Yeah, they were cooking Alonso. I was like, uh-oh, not Qatar 2023 again.
They burnt him.
Onto
the race?
Onto the race. Turn 1, pretty clean. Oscar did get ahead of Lando, and then Lando got ahead of him again, and Lando took the lead again.
Note, and it's Piastri up 1, Leclerc down 1, and right next to it there are 2 wolves. inside me.
And then I think it was turn 6.
4.
Kimi went into Max Verstappen.
So Kimi locked up because he was caught out by all the drivers braking early in front of him, and just went straight
Imagine
into
being
Max.
the biggest Verstappen on the grid and literally T-boning him. I will say though, Max is so cute with the rookies because post-quali, he was like, oh yeah, I saw Bortoletto behind me and I knew I had a yellow sector, so I wasn't going to qualify well, so I thought I would just give him a tow. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, he's such a father. And then literally he got out of the car after Kimi hit him, and Kimi got out of the car, and Max literally looked completely calm. He was fine. And
Yeah.
Kimi, I was like, Kimi probably was terrified because he heard what Max was like when he was younger, and he's like, oh my gosh, he's gonna kill me. And Max was like, don't worry about it. We all make mistakes. It's not your fault. It's fine.
So this crash meant that both Max and Kimi were out the race. So far we have 3 grayed out names. That is Sainz, Verstappen, and Antonelli.
And Kimi's radio, he was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. That was me. I'm so sorry. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody get him a cup of tea and a hug.
And then my next note after the crash is Mercedes, because George and Lewis were fighting on track.
Well, lap 3, the safety car was in. So lap 4 is when George and Lewis were sort of fighting. And then lap 11 is when Oscar and Lando were really fighting. So Oscar's radio engineer person came onto the radio and he goes, what do you want to do? It's up to you. It's up to you. We'll follow your lead. And Oscar said nothing, but sped up just a little bit to the point where he was pushing Lando and his tires a little aggressively. And I really thought Oscar was going to overtake Lando. Like, Lando seemed to be very nervous to have his teammate behind him again, probably traumatized by Canada, and was like, oh my gosh, please don't let me DNF again. And Oscar's like,
probably traumatized by Monza rather than Canada.
Yeah, well, Canada, it's more like he's like, oh my gosh, I DNF'd. Like, there's nothing worse than that. Monza, at least he finished. He probably was also a little stressed with Austria 2024 with Max and him. Lando has been traumatized at this track.
Oscar, you should do Monza 2024 again.
But Lando did stay in the lead. Lap 12 is when Ollie pit, and let me tell you, this is like, lap 12 is when everyone started pitting. Lap 14 is when Colapinto pit. These pit stops were slow.
Yeah.
They were all like 2.9, 3.5. I was like, what is going on?
In terms of front runners, though, George was the first to pit.
Yeah.
On lap 19. And it was a 2.4, which is...
Well, I have something before lap 19. Lap 16, Ferrari, Brian, came onto the radio, and he was like, hey, Charles, we really need you to lift and coast in the corners. And Charles went back and goes, that's exactly what I was doing.
If I hear Lyco one more time, I'm going to kill you.
And then lap 18 is when Alex DNF'd.
Well, they didn't even really show that.
By the way, Alex went into pit, and all of a sudden, Alex was getting out of his car, and I was like, wait a minute. And they were like, okay, anyways, Stroll and Yuki went into each other. There's damage, and it was noted. I was like, wait a minute, rewind. Why is Alex out of his car?
No, literally, I was like, I saw them all then like pushing him into the pits, and I was like,
oh, and that marks Alex's 3rd DNF in a row. Hopefully Silverstone, which is his home race, goes better.
Not that you would know it if you looked at the posters. What are we doing?
Yeah, not that you would know it if you asked Silverstone. Alex Albon, you have a home race in Silverstone to us.
To me.
He's gonna have 2 home races soon. I'm happy for him.
should have given that £1 billion to me.
But George had a 2.4 second stop, which I was like, okay, now we're getting faster. But then lap 21 is when Lando Norris pit, and it was a 3.1.
And then
and Oscar skidded or something like that, and he's like, I really need speed. I have a flat spot. And they came onto the radio, and he's like, don't worry about it.
No,
like, you're fine.
They said you could do 4 with Delta or something else. And Oscar
that was lap 23. Lap 21, he was like, hey, I accidentally locked up and I have a spot. And they're like, no, we don't see that. It's fine. And then on lap 23, they were like, hey, so you can do Delta 4 with this or whatever without it. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, why are we asking Oscar Piastri the strategy? He doesn't have the data.
Well, yeah. That is the issue. But
anyways, he said, okay, we can do this one. And then I think they changed the strategy and didn't show the radio, because on lap 24, like lap 23, they were like, okay, he's going to stay out and do the long run. And then lap 24, he got called into the pits and he did a 3.4 second pit stop. And I was like, wow, if McLaren's slow, Ferrari, keep your drivers out.
Well,
but both Ferraris had a pretty good pit stop.
Yeah.
Charles had a 2.3 and Hamilton had a 2.2. So that's really good for Ferrari.
A lot of this race was just the McLarens
fighting.
Yeah.
Also, I will say, I think it was like right after Oscar came out of the pits, McLaren radioed and he goes, yeah, so what you did in turn whatever, don't do it again.
Yeah.
And it was like his lockup. And I was like, wait a minute. Lando literally crashed into a wall last week.
It's not like he did it on purpose, like...
Let's be real here. People make mistakes. As Hannah Montana says, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has those days. But lap 30 is when the radios started getting sort of funny. Pierre Gasly came onto the radio and he goes, guys, I have absolutely no grip. It feels like I'm playing ice hockey.
Well, Alpine...
And immediately the next lap, his teammate decided to become a demon. Colapinto whacked Yuki.
Yes.
And so Yuki had to go in because he had damage. Did you see how long his pit stop was?
No.
I would have just retired at that point. It was 10.6 seconds. I would have just been like, bring me in. This is embarrassing.
I've had enough.
I've been like, hey, Racing Bulls, can you take me back? Can you send Lawson back? I want to come back.
And then...
But lap 34 is when Yuki was noted. They were like, yeah, we're going to note the Colapinto Sonoda thing. And Yuki got a 10-second penalty for causing a collision. And everyone decided right then and there, I was like, wait a minute. Because that was not Yuki's fault. That was fully Colapinto's fault.
Yeah, because right next to that I have what is Franco's problem. And then I have that repeated further down.
But basically, it was a pretty, like, boring race in the middle.
Yeah.
Like it usually is, like the middle's, you know. But then lap 43 is when it gets exciting, and that is when Lando radioed in, and he goes, so is he just faster everywhere, or what is it? And Will Joseph came back onto the radio, and he's like, he's faster on the straights and the high-speed corners. And I was like, so basically, yes, he is faster everywhere. Because Austria has, like, they have, I think, 11 corners, and I think 9 of them are high-speed corners.
See, it's just, and then the McLaren...
Wait. No, this is before the Civil War. Lap 51 is when Hamilton pit for a second time. And right before that, they were like, okay, box. And he's like, no. And they're like, you have to box, we want to
Actually,
change the
no,
tires.
I
And he
have
was like,
something to say about this
he
because
was like, no, I don't want to come in. Can I
no,
not come in? What happens if I don't come in? And they were like, no, box.
Hamilton was radioing. This is gonna get me cancelled. Hamilton was radioing saying that his tyres were gone and then he needed to come in, and then they pit Charles, and then Lewis was like, my tyres are fine. My tyres are fine. Well, they hadn't pit Lewis, and they were like, no, you need to come in. He was like, no, they're fine. Yeah, Hamilton hadn't pit, but they had pit Charles, and after they pit Charles, he was saying that his tyres were now fine and he didn't need to worry about it, but they were like, no, you need to come in.
Yeah, did not know that. However, I will say, sometimes Ferrari needs to realize that a strategy is not newer tires. It's just how fast can you go on old tires and how much can you keep.
Someone is
old
saying
tires.
fireworks.
Oh, same with me. But it's close to the 4th of July.
Yeah, no, I think it is that reason, because there's no other reason.
Oh.
I don't know why. Yeah.
But lap 53 is when Norris pits. And then I think Oscar pits again.
Yeah.
On lap 54. And he comes out and they are behind Lawson, Alonso, Tsunoda, and Colapinto. Norris gets by Colapinto, Tsunoda, and Alonso. He's still behind Bortoleto. And Oscar goes around because Colapinto gets a blue flag. Mind you, Oscar and Lando are probably 3 seconds apart, and Oscar's engineer comes onto the radio and he goes, you can catch him. And Lando's engineer comes on and goes, hey, you just need to push. You have enough laps between you that you can push and use your tires and you won't lose them by the end of the race. Colapinto, what were you doing? He pushes Oscar onto the grass and basically ends Oscar's chances at P1 because...
Right! Like, it looked very deliberate to me. Like...
Yeah.
Also, you can't be like, oh, I thought that was a Williams instead of a Red Bull or whatever.
Yeah.
That
Or,
car
I
is
thought
bright.
that was Yuki. It's bright freaking orange.
Yeah.
I realized Piastri pits right after that, and it's basically like, okay, you're just racing for P2.
It's just game over from that point onwards.
But lap 58 is when Colapinto got a 5-second penalty for pushing a driver off a track. Should have been like 20 seconds at that point. Like,
not just
Yuki first, then Oscar.
Not just a driver, but the championship leader. Yeah.
And this is when I realized Hulkenberg was up 11 places.
Goat behavior.
Bortoleto was like P8. I was like, wait a minute, what is happening? What? Maybe the illegal car was Sauber all along.
I quite enjoy... What I enjoyed... This is going to sound really weird considering I'm a Ferrari fan. What I enjoy about races like this is when they don't show the Ferrari. Because when they don't show the Ferrari, it means that everything...
It means the Ferrari's cooking. But lap 61... Lap 61 is when people were getting annoyed. Like, literally everyone on the internet got annoyed at Lando for this. He radioed in, and he was like, hey, I need to find speed. Tell me what to do. And so Will Joseph said, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is why he's not going to win the championship. He doesn't know what he's doing. And I'm like, what is a strategist for if not to help the driver find speed?
That is what his engineer is for.
That is his career. That is his entire job.
That's the engineer's job.
Like, and it wasn't even just like Oscar fans who were like, oh my gosh, I'm so annoyed Oscar got screwed over by Colapinto. But literally, like, Charles fans, George fans, Max fans, even like freaking Sauber fans were like, what is he asking? I was like, wait a minute, bro, we need to calm down. That is Will Joseph's job. I really don't understand why people, like, I would be like, yeah, that makes sense. If I was driving and I was in the front and you're coming up back onto that, like, huge strip of people, so Alonso, Bortoleto, Lawson, Tsunoda, Colapinto, they just pushed your teammate off the track, I too would be like, hey, so just in case I do get pushed off the track by Colapinto again, what am I supposed to do?
And also, realistically, he knows that his race is with Oscar, and he already knows that Oscar is faster than him.
Oscar had fresher tires at this point. So lap 64, though, they came on, because this was like right after, I will say, Oscar almost passed Lando, had to lock up. And Lando went over the curb to keep Oscar behind him. And so the next lap, Will Joseph came on the radio and he goes, hey, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it, but I'm just letting you know, you do have damage. I was like, yep, that's when I would start crying. I'm going to be honest. I could never be an F1 driver, because if I was in the lead and I was told I got damage, I think I'd burst into tears.
But
But he did get a little bit of help from Fernando and Bortoleto. So Colapinto and Yuki moved over for Lando, and Alonso moved over for Lando. Oscar got past Tsunoda and Lawson and Colapinto, I think, but was stuck behind Alonso. And according to the FIA, lapped cars are allowed to unlap themselves with the leader. So Oscar and Lando had already lapped Alonso, and Oscar had not yet. And Alonso raced Lando to try to unlap himself. And Oscar was like, yeah, no, I'm not getting involved. I know what Alonso is like. I'll just stay right back here. And it did get, Alonso raced...
should do that more, but not with Oscar. But
Alonso raced Norris, and it caused Oscar to lock up because he didn't want to get involved. And that basically lost Oscar the race, unfortunately.
Alonso, I will pay you £5 if you secure Oscar's championship, okay? I know you're not a stranger to doing this, okay? I will...
He saw the F1 movie. And he went, wait a minute, is this play about us?
I'll give you... Let's call it £5 gate. I'll give you £5 if you secure Oscar's championship.
See, the funny thing that people make jokes about, like, with Crashgate and being like, Alonso, could you just do it again for me for this reason? Like, Max fans were saying it. Alonso didn't even know what was happening. Because he was in the cool-down room, and he went to Flavio, and he's like, dude, that was so lucky. Like, how did we... And Flavio was like, please, for the love of God, shut up. And Alonso was like, dude, that was so lucky. Like, we couldn't even plan that if we wanted to. Like, he was always locking up. I never thought he was going to... And Flavio was like, oh my God, can my driver please shut... And everybody else in the room was like, Alonso's right. Wait a minute. That's way too convenient. But that ended the race. Lando Norris won. So he was P1, Oscar Piastri was P2, and Charles Leclerc was P3. Hamilton was P4.
Maracas P4.
Alonso was P7, which means we got points again. I will say...
Can I just say...
this was... I think it was Liam Lawson's best finish, is what they were saying.
Yeah. But can I just say, in the post-race... Yes. In the post-race interviews, right, normally when Charles is on the podium, but he's not on the top step, he looks downright miserable. And he's always like, well, we could have been on the top step. He looked happy, like positively beaming with P3, which means that this
car, thank God.
This car is absolute fucking dog shit. Okay? And he was like, oh,
Didn't you just say, didn't you say at the beginning of the season that he used so many emojis that it must be good?
well, yes. And we were clearly both wrong. Because, well, to be fair, also at the beginning of the season, Charles put see you in Bahrain.
Oh.
Even though that's 4 races in. Like, okay, goat. You can't read
Anyways, we also have to talk about the polar bear in Texas. Bordelot and Hulkenberg, P8 and P9. Which I was not expecting. However, Bortoletto let him cook. He was like, I see my championship contender from F2 that I beat being brought up as rookie of the year. Not happening.
So, in this race, we had Sainz DNF, Verstappen DNF, Kimi DNF,
Antonelli,
Albon DNF.
Well, actually, Sainz was a DNS.
Yuki dead last and pissed off. Colapinto pissing me off.
Oh. Yeah, also, never mind. I have no notes other than I could have cried. Because Fernando Alonso got points. I will also say, everybody was like, oh, Lance Stroll sucks because Fernando, he's now got equal points with Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll got surgery on his wrist again.
Yeah.
He is still injured and he's still racing. But that was the end of Austria.
Winners and losers?
Yeah. So my winner is Bortoletto.
My winner is Sauber in general. Both, both drivers scored
I just find it very impressive that I find it very impressive though that Bortoletto beat Hulkenberg.
Yeah, totally. But I think Sauber
so like he's more of the winner, but Sauber, like if I had to pick a team, Sauber would be my winner.
Sauber my loser really needed this kind of weekend.
My loser is Williams.
Yeah.
Or Max, because that's the last thing Max needed in his championship run. But Williams had both drivers DNF.
And the DNS was a pretty bad one.
Yeah. Also, I think it was yesterday or today, Horner was asked, like, what do you think about Tsunoda being dead last? And he's like, we have a bad car, but it's not that bad that you can't drive it.
Question. Christian Horner was never an F1 driver. So what does he know about driving F1
This
cars?
means that Yuki Tsunoda is 100% in talks with Cadillac and telling Red Bull that he will be leaving. Because there's a trend that when their drivers are starting to leave, he gets a little bit nastier. He did it with Danny Rick, he did it with Albon, he did it with Gasly, and he's done it with Checo.
That's because he's a
So the day he's nasty about Max Verstappen... Oh my god, wait, speaking of Red Bull, folks.
What? Go on.
We might get a new head of Red Bull next year. Helmut Marko might be gone, it might be Sebastian Vettel, everybody. Catch me supporting Red Bull Racing because Sebastian Vettel will make sure that Horner doesn't ever see the light of day.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to say.
Anyways.
About this weekend.
Yeah. Next week, well, I guess it's this week, is Silverstone. And Rosie will be there. It's Rosie's turn. Yeah, so that episode is a little bit late because Rosie might be exhausted.
Yeah, because I'm also moving house when I get back.
We just need to make that announcement right now. Might be a little bit late.
Happy birthday to my mom.
Happy birthday to Rosie's mom. That's much more important than Happy Birthday, America.
Woo!
And happy birthday, Daniel Ricciardo, today.
Yes.
And we will see you next week.
We might see Danny Rick at Silverstone. We never know.
No, I'll be dead. If that's true, I will not see you next week. But
bye.